Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host, Ron Ovitt. You know, we're in session 4, and I'm so glad that you're here today. Of all the sessions, this is one of the most exciting ones to me. As we look at the brain, it's exciting to see how we learn and then how we can relearn. And it's pivotal to what we're learning here. It's pivotal to the whole emotional relearning theory that we subscribe to. You know, in this session, you're going to learn 3 ways that we learn as children. You're going to learn what is an emotional learning. What do we mean by that? And why is it so important? And then what about the plasticity of the brain? Why is it so important? And how can we change our brain through thoughts, images, sensations, memories, soothing emotions, movement, and beliefs? Now, we're going to just introduce most of this today because, you know, we're a 50-week class, right? So we're going to take a lot of time to learn these things, but I want to introduce it as we're studying the brain here. You know, the learning brain. We have a marvelous brain that's a learning machine, and learning comes through our senses, our touch, our smell, our sight, our hearing, our taste. They all feed information into our brain. And we learned last time about the 3 parts of the brain and how the limbic area, you know, has the hypothalamus and that, where all the sensations come into the brain, and then it takes it and puts it in the right places. And part of that is the amygdala, that limbic area, the amygdala, which is alerted to things it thinks might be dangerous. And how do we know something's dangerous? Through associations. But here's the catch. Not everything we think is dangerous is real. For example, when I was a child, I didn't want to go in the basement because there was a monster down there. Now, to a child, that was very real, and my amygdala perceived it as real. But as I got older, it seemed a little incongruent that I would be so afraid to go to the basement. And so I was able to what? Emotionally relearn that there wasn't a monster in the basement. But there are so many things that we've never emotionally relearned. Things like, I'm broken, I'm ugly, I'm no good. Things that we've learned emotionally stick with us, and then when we see sensations come into the body, the amygdala sees that look on the face, you know, that body posture, that tone of voice, and all of a sudden it goes into high alert. And we'll see about that in a few minutes. You know, today we're going to learn about learning and relearning. You know, Benjamin Bloom, who came up with the theory mastery learning, and that was an expert in learning, he said there was 3 domains. One is cognitive, which is thinking, right? It's the things that the mental skills that we learn, our knowledge. And we talked about that last time as well when we talked about the 2 hemispheres of the brain. And you probably, if you did the discussion afterwards, you probably looked at what parts are you more in, you know. But all of us have that analytical side, that left brain, because school demands it of us, right? But we also have that right brain where we're more learning things more emotionally. And that's the second domain, affective, which means, you know, emotions. Well, growth in our feelings and emotions, our attitude, our self-concept, all those parts. And then there's that psychomotor learning. That's where we learn to walk, to play basketball, to ride a bike. And a lot of these things become procedural. You know, we don't have to relearn them and learn them. We learn them and then we remember them. You know, the beauty of being human, too, though, is that we're relational. And so we have a relational brain. And at birth, up through our young adulthood, our brain depends upon healthy social relationships and positive learning situations in which we'll mature. Unfortunately, some of us didn't have that. And so we had a negative learning experience about who we are. But we'll primarily be addressing that in this program. We'll address learning that's relational with each other, with God, right? God is relational. And we'll address learning that involves the growth in our self-concept, in our emotional development, and in the social relationship areas. And so, like I said, we do that through each other and through God. That's why we need each other. And I encourage you to get a group together. If you're watching this by yourself, that's fine. But hopefully you have a group where you can learn from each other. Now, we talked about in this lesson, and I encourage you, to read the lesson before we do the video and before the discussion group, where you can really get a grasp on what we're talking about here. We talked about 3 phases of learning. We talked about the emotional learning, which is from birth up to 7, then the social learning, which is from 8 to 11, and then from age 12 to 22, 25, I've heard different ones say different ages, is that rational emotional part of learning. The emotions go through all of them, but we add a social experience, and then the prefrontal cortex comes online, and we start to be able to challenge some of it, to rationally think about it. And that's the hope today, that we can rethink some of the things that we believed early on, and therefore have that emotional relearning. Well, the first part was that emotional learning. And remember the hand model of the brain that we did? Take out your brain here. And we talked about the limbic area inside, but we also talked about the prefrontal cortex. And in this lesson talks about 3 areas of that prefrontal cortex. And it's not important that you learn the names or that they're different, but they mature at different stages. And that first stage is that infancy, and that up to 7 years old, where we're emotionally learning. And that means that a lot of things are emotional for us. It links that emotion to expectancy. And that's important. As children grow, they learn from the tone of voice, from the body posture, from what the parents are doing. They learn what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. They learn what's hot, not to touch, and to touch. And so emotions are tied with expectancy. And that's fine as long as we're learning good things about ourselves, right? But you have to remember, we are associating creatures. We associate all the time. Now, what do I mean? Well, let's take an example. Although I'm a recovery coach and I would never recommend gambling to anybody, I think it's one of the worst addictions. The illustration bears showing you, and that is a slot machine, because there's such a direct correlation between movement and reward here. Person's playing the slot machine, puts the coin in, pulls the slot, puts the coin in, pulls, and then he wins a little bit, and that's called intermittent reinforcement, and it will keep you going all day long. But he's getting frustrated, only has a coin or 2 left, puts it in there, and he goes something like this, Then he pulls that thing, and ching, 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 right? Wins the big jackpot. What do you think he's going to do the next time he goes to pull that lever? He's going to put that quarter in and what? You're right. It's going to go like this and then pull that lever. And you know what? It's going to take quite a few times of doing this and not getting any money until he unlearns it. I tell you, association is powerful. And unfortunately, as you read in the literature, children in their brain waves, I've studied brain waves and that a lot and was trained in neurofeedback. Children have predominantly a theta and somewhat of an alpha when they're younger, brain waves going on, and that means there's a strong imagination. That's why, children play with mud pies, right? My grandkids always want me to have a piece of their pie, right? That mud pie. Or the teddy bears are real. It's a real tea party, right? Children are just great with imagination. But it's also almost like a hypnotic, a very suggestible state of mind. And therefore, children can really be impressionable. And they can really believe things and exaggerate them and take them out of proportion. And that's important because that's an emotional learning. Have you ever seen a little child poke their finger and they're bleeding? And if they've watched maybe the others in the family when someone got cut, somehow they're going, oh, and they're just crying, right? Oh, and they're just beset. There's 1 drop of blood, and you have to take a few minutes to calm them down and say, you're not going to bleed to death, okay? And it's that exaggeration, right? And children can be that way, and they learn these things in fear. I had a lot of phobias growing up. I had made some associations early on that really frightened me, and it took time to unlearn those and to relearn the truth. And so we have this emotional learning. The second part is the social learning, and that's where that medial prefrontal cortex comes online, and that's at 8 to 11 years old. And the thing is, that's where we start to socially learn. We're in school now. Now what people say, what they do outside of our family is really important. And a lot of times the significance about this is that the social arena can reinforce some of those negative things that we believe about ourselves. For example, if a child was teased by the siblings and somehow came up with a belief that they were ugly or no good, that sense of shame carries with them, and now they're in school. And it might be that they're somewhat socially afraid, right? Social anxiety about going to school. What will others think? And so they're walking the hall, that kind of walk of shame, right? And they know, somehow intuitively, they know who the popular kids are. And they've been somewhat of a target because of the demeanor and the stature that they have of bullies, perhaps, people that make fun. And they're walking and they see one of those popular people and they look away. They look again and they see him laughing. And their eyes meet and then he turns away. As he's continue walking down that hall, who is he thinking that person was laughing at? Them. Now that person could have been laughing at anything. But right then, they thought they were laughing about them. And right then, it was reinforced, whatever it is they believe. I'm not good enough. I'm broken goods, whatever it is. And that happens hundreds and thousands of times. And it just continues to get rewired in our brain. And so we socially learn. Now, the good news is, and that's why I love us meeting in groups, and that is that we can start to learn that people are happy to be with us. We can start to learn that socially, through social interaction, that we're a masterpiece that God created. As we relate to God and we have that relationship, we can, through the power of the Holy Spirit, start to learn how significant we are, how God created us unique and lovable. Relationships help. That social learning is crucial. And then the last part is that rational learning. And that's our hope, right? That we can get that prefrontal cortex online and start to relearn. That's why as we go through this program, it's so important that we start to recognize when we're starting to get triggered. And as we recognize it, we can calm it down because it kidnaps that amygdala, right? The amygdala, we flip our lid like we said last time, and our brain is hijacked. And what we need to do is regulate it, bring it back down, where we can communicate, where our prefrontal cortex is online, and we can start knowing the truth about who we are. We can correct it. We can emotionally relearn. And we'll be getting into a lot of that as we go through the different classes. And so rational learning is that part that comes online, that part of the brain develops up to 22. And today in the program here, we're going to use that part of our brain. So let's talk about what is an emotional learning. It's key to what we're teaching in here. And emotional learning is where we've learned something about ourselves through an emotional experience. And experience is tied with a belief, okay? But it's a little more complicated than that. And in our notes, you could see there where, first of all, there was an emotional experience. And I asked you to go ahead and pick some of your own. I'll tell you what I was looking at. Humiliation and disrespect was huge for me. And so let's say there was a time when I was humiliated. Well, that's an emotional experience. Something happened, I failed at something, or I said something wrong, or the teacher called on me and I had the wrong answer. Well, right then becomes an emotional feeling. Now, there's all kinds of options. It could be horrified, hopeless. For me, it was anxious. Picked anxious. It was this feeling of humiliation, right? That shame. Feeling like I'm broken, being embarrassed, humiliated, like I said. Those things, that was the emotion I was feeling. But then what? There's an emotional belief tied to it. And that's part of the learning here. And it may have been something that I heard early on, but it's something tied in here, and that is I don't deserve love, I'm worthless, I'm shameful, I'm not lovable, right? Now that happens to someone, something somewhere, when a person, for example, feels they're ugly. Have you ever met someone like that? It may be a guy that's handsome or a woman that feels ugly, and you go to yourself, my gosh, they're so beautiful or handsome. Why do they believe that? And you try to help them understand, but they don't hear you. You can have them write it down 100 times. I'm beautiful, and they won't believe it. They won't believe it. Why? Because it was emotionally learned. And through that humiliation of whatever happened, they start to believe that I'm worthless, I'm ugly, I'm shameful. And then comes with that an emotional fear. It's just not left there where I'm not lovable. If I'm not lovable, what are some of the things that I could fear, right? What are some of those things that could be the repercussion of that? Well, for me, I will be rejected. I'll be forsaken. I will be abandoned. Abandonment was huge. It was tied into that conditional love, right? If I don't perform good, I'll be abandoned. You'll be sent to military school. And I've had to wrestle with people pleasing all my life. The thought of someone not being pleased with me would put me into this tailspin that I'll be rejected, I'll be forsaken. And that's not the final link, right? To be forsaken for a child is a death sentence. And so what happens, the amygdala reacts because it isn't just worried about being abandoned, it's worried about, and for me, I put down what? The emotional alarm is I'm going to die. I'm going to become a non-being. There's only so many because, see, an alarm doesn't go in gradients, right? It's not a little alarm. That's not an alarm. Try having an alarm clock like that. It won't wake you up, right? Fire alarm, it won't get anyone out of the building. It's a, right? It's an alarm that moves you. Emotions, the root word is to move. And so the amygdala sees that and it thinks, hey, I'm going to die. I got to protect you. We got to move. We got to go right now. And that's what makes these emotional learnings so powerful. And the thing is, we can go to that person that feels ugly and say, you're beautiful. We can try to help them cognitively know that in their head, but they don't know it in their heart. And that's where we need to emotionally relearn, right? And the good news is we can, because we have a relearning brain. We can take those well-worn pathways, start to extinguish them, and start to build new pathways. You know, Donald Hebb said, what wires together, fires together. We can start to believe new things emotionally and change. It's called brain plasticity, neuroplasticity, whichever word you want. It's a term that refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt as a result of experience. And so we use brain plasticity to help us emotionally relearn. We can emotionally relearn through that. Now, Michael Mockowitz, who did work on chronic pain, came up with 5 things that we could use that will help us relearn. And I thought it was so exciting when I read that. I've studied chronic pain, other chronic things, because I figured that's part of the overactivation of the amygdala. And when that overactivating happens, then it causes some of these problems. And what he said is that we can use our thoughts, images, sensations, memories, soothing emotions, movements, and beliefs to change us. Friends, there is hope today. And we're going to use all those in this program. You know, God cares about all those. He wants to work with our thoughts, certainly with our beliefs. He wants us through relationships to have new sensations that feed into us, that make us feel the way we should feel, lovable. We want to go back and change the meaning of some of those memories that have tripped us up. We want to have good emotions instead of the negative emotions to the same trigger. And that retrains a lot of ways that we can retrain ourselves. You know, in there you read about the person, Hopper there, that went ahead and worked with chronic fatigue and chronic illnesses and chemical sensitivity. And she said this, and you can read that at the end of the chapter, where she said, regardless of the combination of stressors which may have led to illness, addressing the limbic system function is a key component in the recovery process and is often overlooked. When we place our focus and energy on rehabilitating the brain and correcting the unconscious stress response that is at the root of suffering, our bodies can regain the building blocks that are needed for healing. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting? And that's what we're going to be doing in here. So I invite you to go ahead and have some time of discussion, reread the notes, and let's continue. Next week, we'll be continuing our study on the brain and how God has created us in this marvelous way. Thanks for joining us today on this Emotional Resilience Living with the Fruit of the Spirit class. Please share this video with others. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the other exciting classes. You can also, for books and videos and podcasts, you can go to our website, ronovitt.com, and find out more information.